Hello. I am going to read from this book. I just wanted to say thanks to Ron for inviting me and Heather Lundy, pronounced it correctly, Lundy, for the wonderful introductions. And it was so nice to hear Sophie read and so nice to meet you. I'm just going to read, I think I'll read just from this book today. And there's really nothing, and this is my new book, OBIT, there's really nothing you really need to know except that my mother passed away in 2015 of pulmonary fibrosis. And that's when your lungs sort of harden and then you gradually suffocate to death. And then my father, who appears here quite a bit, had a stroke about maybe 12 or 13 years ago. So he lost his language and he's always around in these poems. And they're shaped like little obituaries. This one's called Memory. Memory died August 3rd, 2015. The death was not sudden, but slowly over a decade. I wonder if when people die, they hear a bell, or if they taste something sweet, or if they feel a knife cutting them in half, dragging through the flesh like sheet cake. The caretaker who witnessed my mother's death quit. She holds the memory and images, and now they are gone. For the rest of her life, the memories are hers. She said my mother couldn't breathe, then took her last breath 20 seconds later. The way I have imagined a kiss with many men I have never kissed. My memory of my mother's death can't be a memory, but is an imagination. Each time the wind blows, leaves unfurl a little differently. This one is called Friendships. Friendships died June 24th, 2009. Once beloved, but not consistently beloved. The mirror won the battle. I am now imprisoned in the mirror, all my selves spread out like a deck of cards. It's true, the grieving speak a different language. I am separated from my friends by gauze. I will drive myself to my own house for the party. I will make small talk with myself, spill a drink on myself. When it's over, I will drive myself back to my own house. My conversations with other parents about children pass me on the way up the staircase and repeat on the way down. Before my mother's death, I sat anywhere. Now I look for the image of the empty chair near the image of the empty table. An image is a kind of distance. An image of me sits down. Depression is a glove over the heart. Depression is an image of a glove over the image of a heart. This one is called My Mother's Teeth. And my mother had dentures all growing up, my growing up, not her growing up. And there were teeth everywhere in the house. And so this one, I think I wrote after I found one of many backup sets of teeth after she died. My mother's teeth died twice, once in 1965, all pulled out from gum disease. Once again on August 3rd, 2015. The fake teeth sit in a box in the garage. When she died, I touched them, smelled them, thought I heard a whimper. I shoved the teeth into my mouth, but having two sets of teeth only made me hungrier. When my mother died, I saw myself in the mirror, her words around my mouth like powder from a donut. Her last words were in English. She asked for a Sprite. I wonder whether her last thought was in Chinese. I wonder what her last thought was. I used to think that a dead person's words die with them. Now I know that they scatter, looking for meaning to attach to, like a scent. My mother used to collect orange blossoms in a small, shallow bowl. I passed the tree each spring. I always knew that grief was something I could smell, but I didn't know that it's not actually a noun, but a verb, that it moves. So I wrote about 70 of these obituaries in maybe a 2-week period, and then I just stopped. I don't remember why. I always say this. I don't know why, but I just stopped. And then I didn't write for a long time, and then I thought I didn't know how to write anymore, which I think happens a lot to writers. And so I started writing all these formal poems, so sestinas, sonnets, villanelles. I've tried them all, and I landed on a couple of these tonkas, which are Japanese syllabic forms. So it's 5 7 5 7 7 31 syllables, and my friend who had helped me with this manuscript basically said all the other formal poems are so bad, so those should go in the trash. But these tonkas are really nice, keep them. So I put 2 on each page and just sprinkled them throughout. So I'll just read, I'll read 2 sets or 4 total. I tell my children that hope is like a blue skirt. It can twirl and twirl, that men like to open it, take it apart, and wound it. I tell my children that sometimes I too can hope, that sometimes nothing moves but my love for someone and the light from the dead star. Do you see the tree? Its secrets grow as lemons. Sometimes I pretend I love my children more than words. No one knows this but words. My children, children, today my hands are dreaming as they touch your hair. Your hair turns into winter. When I die, your hair will snow. I'll read a couple more of these obituaries, and then I'll read some poems from the middle, and then we'll see how much time I have left. This one's called Grief. Grief as I knew it died many times. It died trying to reunite with other lesser deaths. Each morning, I lay out my children's clothing to cover their grief. The grief remains, but is changed by what it is covered with. A picture of oblivion is not the same as oblivion. My grief is not the same as my pain. My mother was a mathematician, so I tried to calculate my grief. My father was an engineer, so I tried to build a box around my grief, along with a small wooden bed that grief could lie down on. The text kept interrupting my grief, forcing me to speak about nothing. If you cut out a rectangle of a perfectly blue sky, no clouds, no wind, no birds, frame it with a blue frame, place it face up on the floor of an empty museum with an open atrium to the sky, that is grief. This one is called The Blue Dress. The blue dress died on August 6, 2015, along with the little blue flowers, all silent. Once the petals looked up, now small pieces of dust. I wonder whether they burned the dress or just the body. I wonder who lifted her up into the fire. I wonder if her hair brushed his cheek before it grew into a bonfire. I wonder what sound the body made as it burned. They dyed her hair for the funeral, too black. She looked like a comic character. I waited for the next comic panel to see the speech bubble and what she might say, but her words never came, and we were left with the stillness of blown glass, the irreversibility of rain, and millions of little blue flowers. Imagination is having to live in a dead person's future. Grief is wearing a dead person's dress forever. This one is called The Clock. It's interestingly, I don't know why it's so interesting, but it's interesting to me. It's the only poem in the entire book that's more than one page. It spreads across 2. It's not that long even. But I was listening to NPR one day in the car, and a scientist was talking about how he could no longer draw a clock. And he was able to speak perfectly well, but he was just flummoxed by it and had come up with all these odd theories. And so I wrote about it. And my dad we used to take him out when he could go out, and he'd always get questioned by the doctors, what's your name, when's your birthday? And he wouldn't know any of it. But the funniest was the clock test. They'd give him intricate clocks to read, and he'd have no idea. This one's called The Clock. Died on June 24th, 2009, and it was untimely. How many times my father has failed the clock test. Once I heard a scientist with Alzheimer's on the radio trying to figure out why he could no longer draw a clock. It had to do with the superposition of three types. The hours represented by 1 to 12, the minutes where 1 no longer represents 1 but 5, and a 2 now represents 10, then the second hand that measures 1 to 60. I sat at the stoplight and thought of the clock, its perfect circle and its superpositions, all the layers of complication on a plane of thought. Yet the healthy read the clock in one single instant without a second thought. I think about my father and his lack of first thoughts, how every thought is a second or third or fourth thought, unable to locate the first most important thought. I wonder about the man on the radio and how far his brain has degenerated since. Marvel at how far our brains allow language to wander without looking back, but knowing where the pier is. If you unfold an origami swan and flatten the paper, is the paper sad because it has seen the shape of the swan, or does it aspire toward flatness, a life without creases? My father is the paper. He remembers the swan, but can't name it. He no longer knows the paper swan represents an animal swan. His brain is the water the animal swan once swam in, holds everything, but when thawed, all the fish disappear. Most of the words we say have something to do with fish, and when they're gone, they're gone. I also added a bunch of poems in the middle of this book because it felt like the book needed a little more variety. So I just pulled a bunch of old poems from another manuscript that were, they're just all elegies. And I made them all 14 lines, so they're artificial sonnets, and put a lot of little spacings and caesuras in between. Renamed the whole thing after a Sylvia Plath poem, Nick and the Candlestick. So the poem is called I Am a Miner, the Light Burns Blue, and worked on them for a little while. I'll just read a couple from here. I'll read two. In the last parking lot in the last city, there are trees that look like nerve endings, scalps of leaves, thousands of birds in threes. Somewhere, the last people have stopped to place white rocks over a dried volcano. Beth loves Jim, and someone loves Matt. At the last party, the light lanced onto the last baby's face, its body still slumping in ignorance. Once, while teaching a child how to draw a person, I learned we're made only of circles and rectangles. I now know a body must loosen before it tightens. I now know a body can loosen and tighten with many men. I now know Earth is a whole, not a sphere, meant to be filled with bodies, not with thinking. And this one, oh, they don't have names. If darkness could be combed, there would be hundreds of knots, morning and night, cross on this concrete, a snail flattened into the shape of a screen, a fish has broken from the water, its rod of a body flickers on the dirt, walkers cross over its eye, somewhere a child tries to wake up by thrashing its body, somewhere bugs grip thugs of dirt and the worms look more beautiful dead. A bee catches on a stroller's wheel and crackles, as if its heart can be broken. If we push the wheel forward, we ignore death. If we walk backwards, we repeat death. So we stand still and try to outlast death. They're kind of hard to read because there's also no punctuation. So never joyous to read those. So maybe I will read one more obit and just two more. Actually, I'll read one more obit and maybe I'll read maybe two tiny little poems that are from a new manuscript. And this one is called America, and it is the only poem in the book that's written as a prompt from Derek Sheffield at terrain.org, who saw some of these obits floating around in the world and asked if I could write write a poem to his America, which is his epistolary series. And this poem references the Florida shooting, the Marjorie Stoneman School. America died on February 14, 2018, and my dead mother doesn't know. Since her death, America has died a series of small deaths, each one less precise than the next. My tears are now shaped like hooks, but my heart is damp still. If it is lucky, it is in the middle of its beats. The unlucky dead children hold telegrams they must hand to a woman at a desk. The woman will collect their belongings in shadows. My dead mother asks each of these children if they know me, have seen me, how tall my children are now. They will tell her that they once lived in Florida, not California. She will see the child with a hole in his head. She will blow the dreams out of the hole like dust. I used to think death was a kind of anesthesia. Now I imagine long lines, my mother taking in all the children. I imagine her touching their hair, how she might tickle their knees to make them laugh. The dead hold the other half of our ticket. The dead are an image of wind. And when they comb their hair, our trees rustle. And so I'll just read two short, tiny little poems from this new manuscript that I'm working on. And they're all in various formal things going on in these poems. So they may not seem like anything much, but they were really, really hard to write. Okay. Actually, I don't even know. So I don't know what pages. I'll just pick one. This one is called When the War is Over. I once saw the deer. They were all wearing blue scarves. We have finally finished killing everything. We are now looking ahead, but have killed past the future. And then I'll end with one more tiny one. Let's see. This one is called The Notes. I stay in bed and listen for any music. Today is cheerful. It has overshot itself and is tomorrow. I'm left behind, waiting for the birds to return. They've moved on. I now know that being birdless doesn't hurt. Thank you.